Yes, Mr. Nudo. I had a chance to review the proposed transcript. Anything else, Mr. Nudo?
Nothing further, Your Honor.
And Mr. Nudo, just refresh my recollection. This is being offered for what purpose again?
Your Honor, the state's position is that this phone call that he made shows the defendant's position. He's voicing an incentive to malinger. He's showing an incentive to make it seem as if he is insane, and it's showed in his belief that if he wins his case, he's going to go to a hospital or to be with guys like this, as he's referring to the other guy on the bus, versus his belief that if he is found guilty and loses his case, then he will spend the rest of his life with gangbangers and hardened criminals. So it goes to, the state believes, voicing an incentive to malinger, and it shows that he, the preferable living conditions of living with a guy like this on the bus versus going to the state prison system, living with gangbangers and hardened criminals.
Thank you, Mr. Nudo. Ms. Sampson, this will be for your witness.
Your Honor, first of all, it comments on sentencing, which is inappropriate for the jury, but much more importantly, it is untrue, and it misleads the jury.
When you say what's untrue, you mean what she just said was untrue, or the contents were?
No, the contents of the statement. To have a few years, better to have that for a few years than to have these gangbangers for the rest of my life. It is completely unrealistic to think that someone found not guilty by reason of insanity would only spend a few years in the hospital. That is beyond highly unlikely, but it leads the jury to think, oh, well, that could happen. He could be out in just a couple of years. And that is not true. It's misleading. It's causing them to think on sentencing rather than to think on the definitions that they've been given and the decisions that they are supposed to make in this case. And for that reason, I would ask that this be excluded.
Your state's position is we're not commenting on what the sentencing possibilities are. This is his belief of what his sentencing possibilities are. This is his belief as to what would be preferable to him. So, and the jury, that is at issue in this case, and the jury is going to get a jury charge on what happens if they find him not guilty by reason of insanity. So that will be something that will be correctly told to them in the law when the court gives them the law. We're not saying that this is accurate, that he's correct, but it is his belief and goes to his incentive, his motive to make this up.
Ms. Sampson, anything else for us?
Just that his belief on what happens in sentencing is not relevant, it is misleading, it is going to lead the jury to believe that he knows these facts better than they do, and they will take that into consideration in making a decision, and that's completely inappropriate.
All right. Thank you. One second. All right, lawyers, we're back on the record. Obviously, at least this morning, the first time the court actually has been exposed to what he may or may not have said during a conversation that may or may not have taken place on August the 4th of 2016. But if the state can lay a foundation that this was a call that involved Mr. Neuman on about August the 4th, 2016. I will allow them to play it at this point in time. I mean, balance between the prejudicial value versus the probative value. The jury may find that it is some worth to them in making their determination on the ultimate issue in this particular case. So I will allow it to be played at this point in time. Over objection. Objection is noted. As I indicated, the state would have to lay a foundation for submissibility. If they do that, it will be played. What they have handed me to my Ms. Venuto, this will be the only portion that will be played after you have laid your foundation on who is on this particular.
Correct, Harvey. The only other portion that would be played is the very beginning of the call, a recorded, that tells the caller that you are receiving a recorded call, or you are making a recorded call. and it tells the recipient that this call may be recorded or monitored. That's the computer voice that does that. That's the only portion that we're playing other than this part.
Okay, with that representation, I have no problems in proceeding if that can be played with that to the witness and if it's made, the foundation is played sufficiently, yes. Obviously, what is the total length of this telephone call? I know you're not going to play it. It's in its entirety, the defense made, but what's the total length of this call?
Karen, the total length of the transcripted portion of the call is just over 3 minutes. It's about 3 minutes and 6 seconds. The beginning introductory part, I believe, is about 2 minutes, a minute and a half.
That's fine. And Ms. Sampson, you may or may not decide to play it in its entirety, but to my understanding, they've been provided with the entire call.
That's correct, Your Honor.
All right. And today is August 17th, and this call was made on or about August 4th, 2016. And you may have told me, counsel, when did you discover this, and when was this turned over to the defense?
On the 5th, August 5th of this year.
All right. That's when it was discovered? And when was it
Yes,
turned over?
and it was discovered, and a copy was made, and it was turned over to the defense when we were here in court that day.
On August 5th?
Yes, sir.
All right. Ms. Sampson, is that, as far as when you received it, is that sufficient? Is that consistent with your recollection?
That is consistent with my recollection.
All right. All right, Lord, with that said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to step off for a minute and let the Garrett bring in the jury. And is your witness here, Mr. Nudo?
We're taking another witness first. And
Oh, no, you taking, I'm not dictating who you call, but not a problem.
The state has a witness here, Your Honor.
Not a problem. So witness is available?
Yes, sir.
All right, Deputy Garrett, what I will do is just step off, go ahead and put the jury in the box. Yes, sir. Thanks, sir.
All rise. Baby seated. All rise.
All right, good morning. You may be seated. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being on time. And thank you for your patience. We're ready to continue. You may call your next witness, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state calls Dr. Joseph Browning.
Go ahead and have a seat for me.
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you shall give this court should be the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Raise your hand. Please state and spell your name for the record.
My name is Joseph Browning, Joseph Browning.
All right, and Dr. Browning, I'm going to ask you to speak into the microphone so that everybody can hear you.
Okay.
Thank you. Tell the jurors, please, what's your occupation? What do you do?
I'm a forensic psychiatrist at Georgia Regional Hospital at Atlanta.
What's Georgia Regional Hospital in Atlanta?
Georgia Regional Hospital is a psychiatric hospital where we have approximately 140 forensic beds where we take care of inpatient forensic patients who are declared not competent to stand trial. There are also adult mental health beds to take care of people who just have general mental illness but not criminal charges in the community.
Okay. And is that a state-run hospital or is that a private facility?
It's a state-run psychiatric hospital.
How long have you worked at Georgia Regional?
I believe I began there in 2007, and I started working full-time at Georgia Regional Hospital in 2010.
Can you tell the jurors, please, a little bit about your training and experience in your field?
Sure. In 1999, I graduated from West Virginia University with a bachelor's degree in biology. In 2004, I graduated from Emory University School of Medicine with an MD. In 2008, I finished the Emory University Psychiatry Residency Training Program. In 2009, I finished the Emory University Forensic Psychiatry Fellowship Program. I'm currently board certified in both general psychiatry and forensic psychiatry.
And what's the difference between forensic psychiatry and general psychiatry?
Forensic psychiatry is the study of how mental health and mental health disease interacts with the law.
And what's general psychiatry?
General psychiatry is just treatment of people who have mental illness.
You mentioned being board certified. What does being board certified mean?
Being board certified means that I have taken a test with through the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology, and maintaining maintenance of certification requirements in that I do continuing medical education hours and go to conferences.
Tell the jurors, please, what does your current practice consist of? What do you generally do day to day?
Day to day, I work on an inpatient unit. I'm in charge of 21 inpatients, forensic inpatients. My job is to work with these people to help them become competent to stand trial. I also do evaluations and treatment. Specifically, my evaluations are for competency to stand trial and criminal responsibility. I'm also the associate clinical director for forensics at the hospital. And in that role, what I do is I look over referrals for any patients coming into the hospital, going to a forensic bed. I supervise approximately 6 other psychiatrists who work in forensic units. And I also supervise the fellowship program where the Emory University Forensic Psychiatry Fellows come and rotate a day and a half a week.
Have you ever published any articles or publications in your field?
I have published articles and publications throughout my career.
Were they peer reviewed?
Yes.
Can you estimate for the jurors, please, how many criminal forensic evaluations you personally have conducted over your career?
I've conducted hundreds. I don't keep track of a specific number. If I had to ballpark, I would say somewhere around 500.
500. And have you previously been qualified as an expert in the superior courts in the state of...
That phone. I'm sorry for the interruption, Counselor. Sorry for the interruption.
Have you previously been qualified as an expert in any field in the state of Georgia or in the superior court across Georgia?
Yes, I've been qualified as an expert in forensic psychiatry.
How many times can you estimate?
In superior court and state court, approximately 80. In probate court, about 5.
Okay. Your Honor, at this time, the state moves to qualify Dr. Browning as an expert in the fields of psychiatry and forensic psychiatry.
Any objection? He's admitted as an expert in this field.
All right. Dr. Browning, can you explain to the jurors the difference, please, between a forensic evaluation you do and what a psychiatrist might do in a treating kind of situation, not a forensic?
So a treating psychiatrist goes and interacts with the patient. They talk to the patient about what might be wrong, what they might do to be helpful, and they set out on a course of treatment, prescribe that treatment, and then they work together to ensure that that treatment remains helpful and change things if necessary.
How is that different from what a forensic evaluator will do?
A forensic evaluator is there specifically to evaluate a person for the court. So the court would issue a court order and ask a question. Is the person competent to stand trial? Is the person criminally responsible? So a forensic evaluator takes that court order and interacts with the patient, gathers collateral information to answer that specific question.
All right. When a person is being treated by a psychiatrist, not in a forensic capacity related to a legal issue, but just as a personal matter, is the psychiatrist, is it general practice or is it typical for the psychiatrist to try to verify any of the information that the potential patient is giving him or her?
It just depends. If the person comes and they appear to be honest, it's always a good idea to get collateral information, but it doesn't always happen. There's not a high degree of suspicion that a person is coming to you and lying if they're coming to you on a voluntary basis.
And how does that contrast with what a forensic evaluator will do when being asked a specific question by court order, as in this case?
As a forensic evaluator, we are looking for evidence. So the person's self-report of symptoms or problems or issues is one part of what we look at, and that's a very important part. But it's also important to gather as much evidence as we can from other sources to support or refute that.
What's your protocol for evaluating whether or not someone is mentally insane under Georgia law?
Well, first, what I want to get is the court order and see exactly, like I said, what is the court's question. Once I have the court order and once I understand what the court wants to know about a person, then my protocol is to gather as much information as I can. I want to look at police reports. I want to look at indictments. I want to look at witness statements. I want to interact with the person who's accused of the crime. I also want to look at previous evaluations, other mental health records. I want to know as much as I can about the person.
All right. And what is the legal standard for determining whether somebody is insane under Georgia law?
There are two prongs of the legal standard. The first prong is it's what's called the right-wrong test. That the person has an inability to distinguish between right from wrong at the time of the crime.
That's one way you can show that someone's not guilty by reason of insanity?
Yes.
Okay, what's the other way?
The other way is a little more complex. The other way is that the person has a delusional compulsion that overmasters their will to resist committing the alleged offense, which is a fancy way of saying that the delusion, if true, justified the act.
The delusion, if true, justified the act.
Yes.
That's right? Okay. Is mental illness and insanity the same thing?
No. Insanity is a legal term, and mental illness is something that a psychiatrist deals with on a daily basis. So mental illness for a psychiatrist is, like I said, it's just something that we look at, something that we treat. Insanity is an issue for the court to decide.
Okay. Can people with serious mental illnesses still know right from wrong?
Yes.
Can people with very serious mental illness that are experiencing delusions, can those people distinguish between right and wrong in those cases?
Yes.
Are there times that they cannot?
Absolutely.
Is there some patients where that's not possible?
Yes.
Okay. And that's what you look for when you do a forensic evaluation?
Yes.
Okay. Have you ever encountered in your career individuals who are currently experiencing a delusion?
Yes.
What kind of symptoms or what kind of signs do you look for in someone when you're trying to determine whether they're experiencing a delusion?
I want to talk to them about what their delusion might be. Typically when I'm seeing someone with a delusion, they come with some reports from past records that there has been that delusion. And so I want to evaluate them and ask them about that delusion. Sometimes they don't, though. And so I want to ask them a lot of good general questions about their life just so that I can see if they're having any delusion that maybe nobody is aware of. Right. Typically people with delusions, well, not typically, they always are. People with delusions believe they're delusions, and that's the definition of a delusion. It's a fixed false belief. So someone with a delusion wouldn't necessarily have that delusion if asked about it.
Okay. Are you familiar or have you had the occasion to interact with people who have been diagnosed with bipolar 1 psychosis?
Yes.
And explain to the jurors, what's that diagnosis? What does that mean?
So bipolar 1 with psychosis is an extreme level of bipolar disorder.
Are there lesser levels of bipolar disorder?
Yes.
Can somebody be bipolar without being psychotic?
Yes.
Okay. Explain to the jurors what that range is.
Okay, so you have the most severe bipolar diagnosis is bipolar 1. And that's where people have severe mood episodes that may or may not come with psychosis, but these episodes are impairing and
What
they
do you mean
struggle
by
with these.
impairing?
That means that they have social or occupational dysfunction. That means that they can't function at work. That means that they're alienating family members. And their psychotic symptoms a lot of times will do that. Their manic symptoms will do that. They're struggling in life, and a lot of times they find their way to the hospital.
Is somebody who just naturally has a lot of energy or who is very creative, is that somebody who fits the definition of manic?
No. Lots of people have energy and lots of people are creative, and that doesn't necessarily indicate mania.
Okay. All right, so I'm sorry I interrupted you. You were explaining the different degrees of bipolar disorder and what that diagnosis can range from.
Yes. So the second level of severity in bipolar disorder is bipolar 2 disorder. Bipolar 2 disorder is where a person has mostly depressive episodes, but they can also pop up into what's called hypomania. And hypomania is a less severe form of mania. In hypomania, the person isn't markedly impaired. They're not having this social and occupational dysfunction that we psychiatrists are very focused on. They're not having psychotic symptoms. And in fact, if someone tells you that they're having psychotic symptoms, by definition, they cannot be in a hypomanic state.
Well, what if somebody is just in a hypomanic state, not all the way up here, but higher than normal? What if they're in that range, but seeing hallucinations or hearing voices? What's that person's diagnosis?
Again, if you're in a hypomanic state and you're seeing things and hearing things, you're experiencing psychosis. And psychosis is a break from reality. So as soon as a person starts experiencing these psychotic symptoms, by definition, they can't be hypomanic. They're in an extreme manic episode. They're bipolar 1. They're in a full-on manic episode.
And what kind of behavior do you typically see from somebody who's in a full-on manic episode?
What I always teach residents and fellows is that the manic person is the first person you see when you walk into the psychiatric unit. They are provocatively dressed. They want to run straight up to you and talk to you and tell you about why they shouldn't be there or how great they are, how they own the hospital, how they're a judge and their family is a judge and they should be released. A lot of times they have hyper-religious delusions and say that they're Jesus. Again,
can I stop you about hyper-religious delusions? What are hyper-religious delusions?
A hyper-religious delusion is where a person believes that they take on more religious significance than they actually do. Lots of people go to church. Lots of people have very thoughtful beliefs about religion. When a person is telling me that they are an angel or that they are Jesus or that they are a prophet, that's when it goes into a hyper-religious area and it's psychotic.
Okay. Is it the same thing as if somebody reads a religious text every day, the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, something like that? Is that the same thing that you're talking about?
No, and I'll give you an example. I have a hyper-religious person right now who sits on the unit every day and transcribes the Bible. And this is something else that you see with manic people. Manic people love to write. So manic people will sit all day long and they will write. He's transcribing the Bible. He has stacks and stacks of pages, just writing it. So that person, I would say, is manic, hyper-religious. He's writing too much, and he is consistent with what you would see in a manic person.
All right. And are the kind of symptoms that you're talking about, are they consistent with what you as a trained psychiatrist would see as evidence of mania, but somebody else might see as a personality quirk or somebody who is just a little off personally?
No, the personality quirks don't cause the dysfunction that a manic episode would cause. And again, I want to emphasize that people who are manic are not doing well. People who are manic are losing their jobs. People who are manic are causing a lot of interpersonal problems. They're struggling at work. They're writing bizarre emails. They're not able to focus on a task. And so if a person is just quirky, then they're just quirky. A manic person is impaired.
Typically, given your experience and what your training tells you, is a person who is experiencing extreme periods of mania, is that person able to function in a corporate setting as an executive with very logical, detail-oriented tasks assigned to that person?
While that person is in a manic state, absolutely not. Absolutely not, under no circumstances would a manic person be able to function as a high-level executive. Manic people are, for lack of a better term, messy. And that everyone can see that. It's not subtle. It's not something that people miss. When you've been in the room with a manic person, you know it.
All right. Hypothetically, can a person who has a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, can that person tell the difference between right and wrong in some situations?
Yes.
In most situations?
It depends on the situation, but yes, people with bipolar disorder live among us and with treatment do just fine.
All right. Delusional disorder. What's delusional disorder?
So delusional disorder is a separate disorder. Delusional disorder is a psychotic disorder. It's a disorder where a person only experiences delusions. No manic episodes, just delusions. And those delusions, again, fixed false beliefs. Those delusions are well circumscribed, meaning that they're only confined to a specific part of that person's life, and they don't necessarily intrude in every other aspect of the patient's life. A really good example of a patient with delusional disorder is a lady that I worked with who, she was functional, she was employed, she had family relationships and friends, and she decided that her pastor was in love with her. And as evidence for that, she would look at his Facebook, and when he would post innocuous things on his Facebook about the Falcons score, she interpreted those things as evidence that he was answering her unspoken prayers. So she had this delusion that her pastor was in love with her, and it impacted obviously her relationship with her pastor because she was charged with stalking. But all other aspects of her life, she was actually doing pretty well.
Is somebody who has delusional disorder, is that, and the delusions that you just talked about that they experience, is that different than a person who has bipolar 1 disorder with psychosis who's having delusions as a part of that manic episode or depressive episode?
Yes.
How is that? Explain that to me, please.
We psychiatrists diagnose people based on what is written in the manual, the DSM. And in that manual, we have psychotic disorders, we have mood disorders, and we have criteria for each one. So the criteria for delusional disorder is completely separate from that of bipolar mania. In delusional disorder, a person can just have a delusion and that's all. In the bipolar disorder section, a person with a delusion also must have a set of mood symptoms that go along with it. Again, I want to emphasize, in bipolar disorder, a person can't just have a delusion. They also have to have manic or mood symptoms.
Did you review the defendant's medical records in this case?
Yes.
And we're talking a minute about what you did specifically in this case, but are you aware of any doctor who's ever diagnosed this defendant as having a delusional disorder?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Are you aware of Dr. Adriana Flores, her work in this case?
Yes.
Did you review the report that Dr. Flores prepared?
Yes.
And did Dr. Flores diagnose the defendant as having this delusional disorder?
She did not.
Okay. To your knowledge, what is the only diagnosis that Dr. Adriana Flores gave this defendant?
I think she said that he was bipolar.
Bipolar 1 with psychosis?
Yes.
All right. So nobody's talking about diagnosing this defendant with delusional disorder. Else, is that right?
Right.
Knowledge. The focus of the medical records that you reviewed, that's diagnosed the defendant only with his mood disorder, bipolar 1, that has a delusional component, but only when it's associated with either mania or depression.
Exactly.
Is that right? Okay. So not that it doesn't exist, it just isn't relevant in this case.
Right. Yeah. But plenty of people have delusional disorder, and it exists, but it's not active in this case.
Not in this case. All right. Can someone with one of the milder forms of bipolar disorder that you described, can that person, even if they genuinely have that milder form of mental illness, can that person still malinger or fake signs of more serious mental illness?
Oh, yes.
Have you seen that before?
Sure. And the definition of malingering is faking mental illness. The definition of malingering says that it's either making up your psychiatric symptoms or exaggerating your psychiatric symptoms. And so it's very well known that people with mental health problems sometimes will malinger.
Sometimes we'll do that. Okay. All right. Let's talk about your work in this case in particular. Did you have on occasion, Dr. Browning, any involvement into the case currently being tried, the case against Mr. Neuman?
Yes, I found out that I was working on this case on June 15th.
June 15th of 2016?
Yes.
All right. And so what, if anything, did you do after finding, after June 15th, 2016 with regard to this defendant and this case?
I reviewed a lot of records.
A lot of records. Tell the jurors, what did you review?
I first got the court order to see exactly what needed to be evaluated. And then I looked through the different reports of the experts. There was a report by Adriana Flores. There was a report by Tracy Marks. There was a report by Pamela Crawford.
And those three individuals are doctors?
Yes.
Doctors?
One is a psychologist, two are psychiatrists.
Two are psychiatrists? All right, I'm sorry,
Yes.
continue.
I got the
What's the
indictment.
difference, before you get going, what's the difference between a psychiatrist and a psychologist?
A psychologist has gone through graduate school to learn therapy and gotten a PhD or a PsyD or some degree in psychology. A psychiatrist has gone through medical school and comes at the field of mental health from a medical perspective, an illness treatment perspective.
All right. So if we were talking about some psychological tests that someone either gave to an individual or was interpreting, is that kind of work done by a psychologist or a psychiatrist?
That's done by a psychologist, and that's one of the reasons why we have both Dr. Huey and me involved in this case. Dr.
Right,
Huey.
I'm going to ask you about that in just a minute.
Sure thing.
If we are talking about prescribing medicine for someone who is mentally ill or evaluating somebody's physical condition, is that a psychiatrist or a psychologist that does that?
That's a psychiatrist.
And that's you?
That's my role.
Okay. All right. Now, you were telling us that you and Dr. Huey, we heard from Dr. Huey yesterday. Dr. Huey is a psychiatrist or a psychologist?
He is a psychologist.
Okay. And so what is did you do any work with Dr. Huey in this case?
Yes, we evaluated Mr. Neuman together.
Okay. You were a team in
Yes.
doing that? You were assigned as a team and you worked as a team?
Yes.
All right. And why do you do that? Why do you have a team that is comprised of a psychologist and a psychiatrist for the same case?
It's kind of state policy, so that when we have a high-profile case, a very important case like this, we want to do everything we can to make sure that we have the correct opinion. So we include a psychologist so that any psychological testing can be reviewed, and we use a psychiatrist so that we can look over the medication and see any medical issues.
Okay. How many hours to date have you put into this case, would you estimate for the jurors?
Estimate 200.
200 hours? Just since June 15th?
Yes.
Thank you. How are you compensated for those hours? How are you paid for your work on this case?
I get a salary because I work for the state, and
right.
so
Are you paid by the hour, or do you bill by the hour for this case?
No.
Are you compensated any more for coming in and testifying, for example, as opposed to being at the hospital today?
No.
All right, so you were telling us the material that you reviewed prior to your evaluation of the defendant. And you talked about reports from Drs. Flores, Dr. Marks, Dr. Crawford. What else did you review?
I looked over the indictment. I reviewed taped interviews of Mr. Neuman by Dr. Crawford. There were two. I looked over the treatment records from a Lori Jerkovich, and I don't know how to pronounce her name,
All right.
from Johnson Ferry Psychological Associates. I reviewed the medical records from his incarceration. I reviewed a taped interview of Mr. Neuman by the Dunwoody Police. I reviewed the taped interview of Mr. Newman's wife. I reviewed a taped interview of Mr. Newman's friend Orna Hannison and Jan De Silva. I looked over a taped interview of that. Taped interview of Melanie White and Christy Oliveira. Taped interviews with Jim Bono. Also taped interviews of multiple General Electric employees, and I can list the names of the people who I included in my report if that would be helpful.
Yes, would you read them for us?
Sure. Alan Shackley, Al Harris, Ann Abahazi, Jerry Morton, Alice Roberts, Michael Farnham, Carmen Harding, I also looked over emails that Mr. Neuman sent and received.
All right. In addition to that material, did you review, you may have mentioned it, the defendant's medical records? Any medical records that were available to you?
Yes, the medical records from his incarceration. I also want to add that I spoke with Mr. Neuman on June 30th, 2016.
What was the date of your interview with the defendant?
June 30th, 2016.
All right. And before we talk about that, I wanted to ask you something, because you are a medical doctor.
Yes.
Did you note in the defendant's medical records, or did you see anything about the defendant having surgery in December 2010?
Yes, in December 2010, he had what's called an exploratory laparotomy, which basically means he had an abdominal surgery where they opened him up and looked inside to see what was going on.
All right. And we don't need a whole lot of details about that particular procedure, but was there anything about the fact that the defendant had whatever abdominal problem he had at that time that would have affected his mental health on the day of the murder, November 18, 2010?
I don't think so.
Okay. Any indication of that in the records at all?
No.
He wasn't on medication at the time, November 18, 2010 that you're aware of?
No, he said he was not.
Okay. So there isn't anything about that that affects your your opinion or your evaluation of him in any way?
No.
All right. Thank you. All right. You spoke to the defendant. How many times did you speak to the defendant?
Once.
All right. And the date was the 30th of June?
Yes.
All right. How long did you speak with him?
3 hours and 20 minutes.
All right. And what kind of things were you looking for when you spoke with him?
When I meet with anybody, I'm doing a mental status exam. And what that means is that I'm looking at their appearance. I'm looking to see if they're disheveled or if they're well-groomed.
Why are you looking for things like that?
Because mental illness comes in many shapes and sizes. And so it's not just about what someone tells me. It's about how they look, how they're carrying themselves, and what they're doing. So that's why a mental status exam is so important. You can tell a lot about a mental illness without even talking to someone.
Okay. And did you notice anything unusual about the defendant's appearance, his demeanor, anything like that when you met with him in June 2016?
Not on the day I spoke with him, no.
Okay. Who else was present when you spoke with him?
Dr. Huey.
Dr. Huey? Just the three of you?
Yes.
Okay. And how was it set up? Were you close to him? How'd you interact with him?
We had a table between us. We were in an open room at the jail. They wanted to put us in one room, but the air conditioning wasn't working, and so they were kind enough to move us upstairs to a different room. Mr. Neuman sat on one end of the table, Dr. Huey and I sat on the other.
All right. And did you write a report in this case?
Yes.
Okay. Is that your report there in front of you?
Yes.
Did you write a separate report from Dr. Huey, or did you all write a report together?
We wrote the same report.
Same report? All right. And what's the date of your report?
July 11th, 2016.
How long is it?
22 pages.
22 pages. All right. When you met with the defendant, did you tell him who you were and what you were there for?
Yes.
What did you tell him?
We told him who we were and what we were there for.
All right.
We told him that we were there for the purposes of a court-ordered evaluation. We told him that we were there to discuss his criminal responsibility or how he was thinking at the time of the crime. We let him know that the evaluation was not confidential and that we may be asked to testify in court to anything he said, so that there were no secrets. And
Why did you tell him that part about the confidentiality? Why is that important?
He needed to understand that he was waiving his rights to self-incrimination by speaking with us.
All right. And is that something you do in every forensic evaluation?
Every single one.
Okay. Did the defendant appear to understand what you were telling him?
Yes.
All right. While you met with the defendant that day, was he cooperative with you?
He was.
Did he answer your questions?
Yes.
And he volunteered information?
Yes.
All right. Was the defendant able to remember the details of the crime when you met with him in September 2016?
Yes.
What did he tell you about his, what he recalled of the planning, what steps he took to plan the murder?
He said that, first and foremost, he did not want to harm anyone else. He said that he thought about blowing up Mr. Sneiderman in his car, and I specifically asked him, do you know how to do that? And he said, no, I'm an engineer. I can figure that out. But again, he was trying to reduce collateral damage and not harm anyone else. He said he also thought of poisoning Mr. Sneiderman but wasn't sure that that would be effective, and so he decided to use a gun to shoot Mr. Sneiderman, and that way he could assure that it was only going to be Mr. Sneiderman that was harmed.
Did he tell you what else he did in order to plan the murder or to put it into effect?
Yes, he said that he planned to get a disguise. He talked about renting a car. He talked about renting a hotel room so that he could change into the disguise. He talked about 2 incidents where he planned to murder Mr. Sneiderman. The first incident was aborted.
You may approach lawyers. Mr. Lane, is there an objection?
No, Judge, I'll withdraw.
All right, there's no objection, therefore there's nothing for me to rule on. Go ahead.
No, I think you can continue, Dr. Browning.
I believe I was talking about how he discussed planning the murder
Yes,
twice.
what did he tell you about planning the murder or any attempts he made on Mr. Sneiderman's life prior to November 18th, 2010?
Yes, he said that there was another attempt made, the previous attempt made on Mr. Sneiderman's life, where he was lying in the yard at their house.
Whose house?
At the Sneiderman household.
And who was lying on the side of the house?
Mr. Neumann was lying beside the house, waiting for Mrs. Sneiderman to leave with her daughter and waiting on Mr. Sneiderman to leave with his son so that he could murder him when Mr. Sneiderman came back from dropping his son off at daycare. Unfortunately for Mr. Neumann, he was detected. There was a gas leak outside of the house, and Mr. Sneiderman came out, smelled the gas leak, saw Mr. Neumann standing or in the yard with a disguise. Mr. Neumann said that he walked away quickly and did not think that Mr. Sneiderman recognized him.
How close in time to the actual murder was this first attempt that the defendant told you about? Did he mention that to you?
I don't remember exactly when it was.
Okay.
I want to say it was within weeks. It was a very short time period.
Okay. Did the defendant tell you anything about buying a gun or purchasing a gun, the gun that he used to murder Mr. Sneiderman?
Yes, he said that he did some internet research, responded to an internet ad, and met with a man who sold him the gun. He said that the gun actually set him outside of his budget because he was in a strict budget at that time period, but it was a worthwhile purchase and that he bought it anyway.
Did the defendant have any difficulty or appear to have any difficulty recalling the details of the event when he's describing them to you?
No.
Okay. Did the defendant tell you about his actions on the day of the murder?
Yes.
What did the defendant tell you about his actions the day of the murder?
Mr. Neumann said that on the day of the murder, he got to work early, got to his office around 5:30 in the morning, and at that time he answered a few emails, and then he set some emails up so that they could be automatically sent while he was gone. He then said that he left the office through a back door and went to a hotel that he had rented using the rental car that he had also rented, changed into the disguise that he had purchased, and then went to the Sneiderman household where he waited for Mr. Sneiderman to leave the house with his son to go to the daycare. He then followed Mr. Sneiderman to the daycare and waited for Mr. Sneiderman to leave his son in the daycare, and then came outside of the daycare and shot him got back in his car, drove back to the hotel, changed out of the disguise, turned the rental car in, and then went back to work and continued with his day.
Did the defendant tell you anything about going to the funeral or going to the Shiva and otherwise making contact with the Sneiderman family, Rusty Sneiderman's family?
Yes, he said that he did attend the Shiva.
When the defendant was describing the events to you, did he at any time tell you that he felt in danger from Rusty Sneiderman?
No.
Did he say that Rusty Sneiderman had a gun or he thought Rusty Sneiderman was going to kill him?
No.
Did the defendant ever tell you anything that made that he believed at that time that there was anybody who was in imminent danger from Mr. Sneiderman?
No.
Did the defendant also tell you details about his personal history?
Yes.
Did he tell you about being sent away to boarding school when he was a child?
Yes.
When he was a teenager?
Yes.
Did he tell you about being raised by nannies and housekeepers?
Yes.
Did he tell you about instances of some physical abuse from his father or anybody else?
Yes, he said that his father was an alcoholic who treated him poorly.
Assume for a second that all of that is true. Is there any connection between trauma as a child and the development of bipolar disorder? Does being abused as a child cause bipolar disorder?
No. If plenty of people have trauma and do not develop bipolar disorder, and we can see that with our veterans coming home from war. They've experienced a lot of trauma but are not uniformly diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So the trauma is not causative for bipolar disorder, but if someone has bipolar disorder and they experience that can be very stressful for them, and that can cause a mood episode.
Did the defendant provide enough information to you, and were you able to review enough other information for you to determine whether, in your opinion, the defendant was experiencing any symptoms of mental illness on the day he shot Rusty Sneiderman?
I don't believe that he was experiencing any symptoms on the day of the shooting.
Do you have a diagnosis of the defendant as to his state of mind on the day that he shot Rusty Sneiderman?
My diagnosis of the defendant was that he was malingering mental illness.
And, I think I forgot to ask you this earlier. When we talk about the defendant's mental state that's relevant to a not guilty by reason of insanity defense, what time period is it that you are looking to evaluate when you do this forensic evaluation?
As far as what's specifically relevant to whether he is not guilty by reason of insanity, I want to know what he is thinking on the day of the event. I want to know specifically what are his thoughts, what are his feelings, how they related to his actions on that day.
On the day, and that's the defendant's mental state that is to be evaluated, what his mental state was at the time he committed the act. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And what did you base your opinion? You said that your diagnosis was that he was malingering.
Yes.
At that time period, that he didn't have he wasn't experiencing symptoms of severe mental illness on that day. Is that right?
Right.
Okay. Explain to the jurors how you reached that decision. What factors did you use?
Well, lots of factors. One important one was that his description of some of his symptoms of mental illness changed and was not typical of what true mental illness brings.
Can you explain that for the jurors, please?
Sure. So specifically, Mr. Neumann described having visual hallucinations of a demon and of an angel that came to him at different points. And to talk about the demon first, he described the demon as being larger than life, very tall, overwhelming, and said that the demon gave him vague commands, come with me, go with me, and said that the demon had nondescript facial features. In true visual hallucinations, and when I say visual hallucination, what I mean is the person is seeing something that's not really there. A true psychotic visual hallucination is of a figure, a person who's normal sized. It's of a person whose facial features you can make out. True hallucinations involve very direct comments. It's not vague. It's not come with me, join me. It's very direct. Kill yourself. That's what a true hallucination will say. So his description of the demon didn't...
Or disease.
No.
Is there anything else that's inconsistent about the defendant's description of the symptoms that he told you about that contributed to your conclusion that he was malingering?
So we talked about the demon. Now, discussing the angel, there were also inconsistencies.
How so?
Mr. Neuman said that he was visited in July by an angel, and he again, he told Dr. Crawford in an interview in November 2011 that the angel that came to him was large, oversized, just as tall as the demon. He told Dr. Huey and me that angel was normal-sized. So right there is a discrepancy.
Well, it was a couple of years ago. Because that interview with Dr. Crawford, that was back in 2011, right?
Yes.
Is it possible that the defendant just forgot, or he's remembering this visual hallucination different now than he described it at the time?
Well, I would say that's very unlikely, because if you have an angel that's coming to you and giving you ideas that you need to murder someone, and this is a seminal event in your life, these details aren't forgotten. We all remember where we were on September 11th, 2001. And likewise, I would say that this is one of those events for Mr. Neuman where he would remember these things.
Given your experience with individuals, anything else in the defendant's description of the symptoms that he described to you? Anything else in that caused you concern or was of influence to your opinion?
Yes, he also said that the angel, when he was talking to Dr. Crawford in November 2011, he told Dr. Crawford that he could feel the angel touching him. And that is a tactile hallucination.
What's tactile hallucination?
Tactile hallucination is a hallucination where you feel something. And again, this is a hallucination that typically is seen in people who are using and abusing illegal drugs or have brain damage. This is not typical for people who are psychotic or experiencing any kind of mania.
Would that be typical for someone who's having a psychotic episode as if their psychotic episode was related to bipolar disorder?
No, that would not be typical.
Okay.
And beyond that, when he spoke with us in June 2016, he said that he could not feel the angel touching him.
Well,
Again,
isn't that more
discrepancy.
consistent now with somebody who's actually experiencing a delusion consistent with bipolar 1 psychosis?
That would be a more consistent experience. Inconsistent with what he reported before makes me skeptical because the story is changing.
Okay. Anything else about the description of the defendant's symptoms as he gave them to you that was of concern?
I don't think so.
All right. Anything about the nature of the planning of the event that influenced your opinion one way or the other? Is that significant to you?
Yes. Manic people really struggle to put organized plans together. And so when Mr. Neuman was talking to us about how methodical he was in his planning and how thoughtful he was very thoughtful about not harming anyone else. He took a gun safety class. He wanted to make sure that no one else was harmed. And I think that goes against what a manic person would do. Remember, manic people are very impulsive. Manic people are not thoughtful about others. Manic people do what pops into their head right then and there.
What about his behavior on the day of the murder? Is there anything about his behavior on the day of the murder that was significant to your opinion?
Yeah, again, thoughtful, methodical, planned. It did not at all seem impulsive, did not at all seem reckless in the sense that he did what he needed to do to accomplish what he set out to accomplish. And then especially considering when he came back after the murder and continued with his day as usual, interviews with his colleagues at GE and his employees indicated that he was doing well. I think one employee said, quote, complete professionalism. And another one said that he had gotten really good advice from Mr. Neuman about how to interact with the superior on that very same day. Manic people don't give good advice.
Is that what you'd expect to see from someone who was acting in a way that they did not know right from wrong or experiencing a manic episode? Those are two different questions.
Don't give good advice. Manic people are messy, they're impulsive. They can't put all those things together.
What about the defendant's actions after the crime, after the murder? Anything about the way the defendant behaved after the murder, up until and including his arrest in July 2011, that was of influence to your opinion?
Well, Mr. Neuman said that he said when the angel came to talk to him the first time, the angel told him that the Sneiderman children were his.
That's what he told you?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Neuman didn't behave in a way that was consistent with that. So pre-murder, post-murder, he in emails, in conversations with people, he didn't in any way indicate that he had more than the 3 children that we know him to have.
Why is that significant to you? Maybe he just didn't want to tell anybody else, or could he was experiencing a true delusion that the Sneiderman children were his own. Maybe nobody asked the right question. Is that possible?
Well, if you look at the notes from Lori Jerkovich, she discussed his children.
Without telling me what anybody else said specifically, can you tell me if you, based on your review of the evidence, if you uncovered any bit of material which the defendant described having more than the 3 biological children that he did in fact have?
No.
Okay. And was he asked at any time that you're aware of about how many children he had?
I believe when he was admitted to the jail, he might have been asked. I'm not sure.
And if you don't recall specifically, don't worry about it. In the email correspondence you reviewed, you said you reviewed some email correspondence to and from the defendant?
Yes.
Okay. And what was the relevant time period that you reviewed this email correspondence?
Email correspondence, probably from, June through December.
Of 2010?
2010.
All right, so the months leading up to the murder, including after the July incident where the defendant says the angel came to him, told him the kids were his. Did you review any email communication or any contemporaneous, happened at the time, communication from the defendant suggesting that he thought he had more than 3 children?
No, and there was one specific email to Karen Steinfeld where he just kind of spontaneously mentioned his 3 children and talked about what they were doing.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you've been going for about an hour with Assistant of Deputy Garrett. This will be your first morning break. Deputy Garrett is having back in about 10 minutes. Yeah, 10 minutes, ladies and gentlemen. All right.
Sitting right on top of my desk, open, probably to the page that you and I discussed. So.
Okay.
Good? Yes. I feel like it's a late October football game here with the weather.